Billionaire keeps falling ill after wife's meals, until Black Maid uncovers hidden secret. A billionaire loved by many, envied by more, suddenly begins to waste away. Every doctor failed him, every test came back clean, yet after every meal prepared by the woman he trusted most, his wife, his body weakened again. What no one knew was that the truth sat quietly in his mansion, watched through the eyes of a maid who refused to stay silent. What she uncovered would shake the walls of power, loyalty, and love itself. This is Story Globe, where secrets never stay buried. Subscribe now and stay with us until the very end, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust. He was a man who seemed untouchable, with towering glass buildings in his name, a fleet of cars gleaming in the sun, and a reputation built on power and respect. Alexander Cole was the kind of billionaire people admired from a distance and envied in silence. His life looked perfect, his mansion buzzed with staff, his wife Clarissa never left his side, and the world believed they were a picture of elegance and loyalty. But beneath that golden image, something was terribly wrong. Alexander's health began to decline in ways no one could explain. It started subtly, a wave of dizziness here, a sudden loss of appetite there. Soon his once powerful stride slowed, his sharp eyes dulled, and his body built on discipline and control started betraying him. Doctors rushed in and out of the mansion, blood tests piled on his desk, and still no answers came. To the public, he appeared tired, maybe stressed, but behind closed doors every meal brought him closer to collapse. Clarissa, ever the graceful wife, insisted on cooking for him herself. She would smile as she brought plates of carefully prepared meals, brushing his hair back with tender hands, whispering that everything would be all right. To outsiders, it looked like devotion, but to the staff who watched silently, there was something unsettling in the way her eyes followed him as he swallowed each bite. Among those staff was a maid named Evelyn. She was quiet, hard-working, and largely invisible, exactly the way the mansion preferred its servants to be. But Evelyn had a gift for noticing things others ignored. She saw how Alexander's hands trembled more after dinner, how he often clutched his stomach after dessert, how the sickness only ever came after Clarissa's meals. And Evelyn began to wonder, was this illness truly a mystery, or was it being carefully crafted? Evelyn's heart pounded as the thought took root. She knew the risks of even imagining such a thing. To accuse a woman like Clarissa, a woman who held the heart of the billionaire and the keys to his empire, was to invite destruction upon yourself. Yet day after day, as Alexander grew weaker, Evelyn's suspicion grew stronger. She could no longer ignore the shadow creeping over the mansion. Then one afternoon, the moment came. Alexander collapsed at the dining table, his breath shallow, his skin pale. Clarissa cried out, summoning help, but Evelyn stood frozen, her eyes darting from the untouched wine glass in his hand to the half-eaten meal before him. Her instincts screamed that the answer lay on that plate, but she also knew, if she made the wrong move, her life might never be the same again. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, as Alexander slumped against his chair, his lips drained of color. Staff rushed in. 2 guards lifted him. A butler hurried to call the private doctor. Clarissa's cries filled the air, but there was something strange about her voice. It was loud, yes, but not trembling, almost measured, as if she wanted everyone to hear how distressed she was. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on the half-eaten plate. The roasted chicken, the delicate sauce drizzled across it, the garnish carefully placed. It looked harmless, delicious even, but Evelyn's gut told her otherwise. She reached out slowly, pretending to adjust the tablecloth, and slipped a small piece of the chicken into a napkin. Her hands trembled as she tucked it deep into her pocket, before anyone noticed. Hours passed. Alexander lay in his room under observation, the doctor shaking his head in frustration. His vitals keep dropping, but there's no clear cause. It doesn't make sense, he muttered. Clarissa stood by the bedside, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her gaze lingering on her husband's weakened frame. The staff lined the hallway, whispering in low tones, afraid of what the future might hold. That night, while the mansion was quiet, Evelyn sat alone in her small quarters, staring at the napkin on her dresser. Her hands itched to unwrap it, to see what secrets lay hidden inside that single bite of food. But what could she do? She was just a maid, with no voice in a world ruled by money and power. If she accused Clarissa and was wrong, she would lose everything. If she was right, she might lose her life. The following day, Evelyn made a choice. On her way back from the market, she stopped by a small pharmacy owned by an old friend of her late mother. Discreetly, she asked for a test. The pharmacist, puzzled but kind, agreed to run a simple check on the sample she brought. Evelyn paced the tiny room, her palms sweating, every tick of the clock digging into her nerves. When the pharmacist returned, his face was pale. "There are traces of poison," he whispered. Evelyn's knees buckled. Poison. The word echoed in her mind like a thunderclap. She had been right all along. Someone was trying to kill Alexander Cole. And not just anyone. It had to be the person serving him every meal. But Evelyn couldn't celebrate the discovery. Instead, fear wrapped around her like chains. What was she supposed to do with this knowledge? Clarissa wasn't just a wife, she was a master manipulator with influence in every corner of Alexander's empire. One wrong move, and Evelyn would disappear without a trace. That evening, Evelyn stood by the dining room doorway as Clarissa served Alexander again. This time Evelyn's eyes were sharper, her breaths shallow. She watched Clarissa's hands linger a second too long over the wine glass. She noticed the faint curl of her lips when Alexander obediently lifted the fork to his mouth. To everyone else, it looked like devotion. To Evelyn, it looked like a performance. Her heart pounded louder with each second. She wanted to scream, to knock the plate from his hands, to expose Clarissa right then and there, but she forced herself to stay still. She needed proof, undeniable, unshakable proof. And so, she began to plan in silence. Alexander's health spiraled downward, his once commanding voice now reduced to whispers. Doctors suggested rest, but no treatment seemed to work. Clarissa insisted on taking more control, choosing his meals, limiting visitors, and quietly dismissing staff she deemed unnecessary. Evelyn noticed the pattern. One by one, the longest-serving workers, those loyal to Alexander, were sent away. In their place, new faces appeared, all with eyes fixed on Clarissa for instruction. It was as if she was rebuilding the mansion, brick by brick, into her own kingdom. But Evelyn held on to her secret. The napkin, the pharmacist's words, the proof of poison. It gave her courage. She began to act carefully, timing her chores so she could hover near the kitchen when Clarissa cooked. And one afternoon she saw it. Just a flash, but enough. Clarissa's hand slipped something small from her apron pocket, mixing it into the sauce before quickly stirring it away. If Evelyn had blinked, she would have missed it. Her breath caught. There, it was the act itself. But still she had no way to prove it to Alexander. If she confronted him without evidence, Clarissa would twist the truth, paint Evelyn as jealous, even fire her on the spot. Evelyn needed a plan. That night, she made one. She would switch the meals. The next morning, when Clarissa left the tray unattended for just a moment, Evelyn acted. She carefully moved the tainted dish onto a smaller plate she had hidden, replacing it with a clean serving from another pot. Then, trembling but determined, she carried the poisoned dish to her own room, locking it away. At lunch, Alexander ate, and for the first time in weeks, he did not collapse. His color returned slightly, his breathing steadied. The doctor was baffled, praising Clarissa's efforts. Clarissa smiled sweetly, but Evelyn saw it, the flash of confusion in her eyes. Clarissa knew something was wrong. That night, Evelyn's heart raced as she returned to her room. She stared at the poisoned meal, her mind spinning. Tomorrow, she would bring it to the pharmacist again, get stronger proof. But when she unlocked her door, her blood froze. The plate was gone. Someone had been in her room. Panic gripped her chest. She searched everywhere, but the dish had vanished. And then came the soft knock on her door. Evelyn turned, dread flooding her veins. Standing there was Clarissa, her face calm, her smile flawless. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, "I couldn't help but notice how close you've been to my husband lately. Watching him, watching me. Is there something you'd like to tell me?" Evelyn's throat went dry. Clarissa's eyes glimmered in the dim light, sharp as glass. She knew. She had found the place. She was warning Evelyn, without saying the words, "Stay quiet, or you'll be next." But just as Evelyn thought her world was caving in, something unexpected happened. The next day, a stranger arrived at the mansion. A man in a grey suit, claiming to be an old business associate of Alexander's. But his interest wasn't in business. It was in Clarissa. He whispered to Evelyn, when no one was watching, "You're not the only one who suspects her. I've been following her for months. If you want the truth, Meet me at the garden after sundown. Evelyn's heart pounded. Was this man friend or foe? Was he the key to saving Alexander, or another trap laid by Clarissa herself? Evelyn waited for the moment to sneak into the garden. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. The stranger's words haunted her all day. If someone else suspected Clarissa, maybe she wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe she had found an ally. But when she finally stepped into the moonlit garden, the benches were empty, the air too still. She called out softly, "Hello." Silence. Then from behind the hedge, two men in dark coats appeared. They weren't the stranger she had seen earlier. Their faces were cold, their steps heavy. Before Evelyn could move, they closed in, each gripping one of her arms. "Let me go," she whispered fiercely, trying not to draw attention from the house. And then from the shadows, Clarissa emerged, calm, regal, terrified. "You really should have stayed in your place, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping like honey laced with venom. "You think I didn't know you've been meddling? You think you can outsmart me in my own home?" Evelyn's stomach twisted. The mysterious man, the supposed ally, had been a set. Clarissa had baited her, drawing her out like prey. Clarissa stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the night air. "My husband is a fool. He built an empire, but never saw the cracks forming beneath his feet. I did, and I won't let a servant ruin everything I've worked for." Evelyn wanted to scream, to warn Alexander, but one of the men pressed a hand over her mouth. Clarissa leaned in, her smile unshakable. "Don't worry, I won't kill you. Yet. But if you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure no one even remembers your name." With that, the men shoved her to the ground. By the time she scrambled up, they were gone, Clarissa already gliding back into the mansion like nothing had happened. Evelyn's body shook, her palms scraped, but her mind burned. She couldn't keep silent anymore. She had to tell Alexander. She had to risk it all. The next morning, she stood outside his study, clutching the doorknob, ready to spill the truth. But when she entered, her blood ran cold. Alexander was already waiting, his eyes tired, his face pale, but his gaze was fixed on her, not with trust, but suspicion. Clarissa stood behind him, a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft like silk. "Darling, I told you, the maid has been acting strangely, sneaking around, watching us. She even accused me of poisoning you." Alexander's brow furrowed, his voice weak but sharp. "Evelyn, is this true?" Evelyn's heart sank. The trap had snapped shut. Clarissa had twisted the story first, painting her as the villain. Now the man she was trying to save looked at her like a traitor. For the first time, Evelyn wondered, was she already too late? Evelyn's lips trembled, her voice breaking as she tried to speak. "Sir, please, you have to believe me. I've seen her put things in your food. I took a sample, enough." Alexander's voice thundered, though weak. He slammed his hand on the desk, coughing immediately after. His once warm eyes, now hollow from illness, glared at her with betrayal. "How dare you accuse my wife? After everything she has done for me, you think I'd let a maid poison my marriage with lies?" Clarissa leaned over, resting her cheek against his shoulder, her hand stroking his chest soothingly. "Darling, she's frightened. She doesn't understand. Perhaps it's best we let her go. For her own sake." The words slid like poison themselves, and Evelyn knew what they really meant. Clarissa was pushing her out, silencing her without bloodshed, but with the kind of power that left no room for return. Alexander's jaw tightened. "You are dismissed, Evelyn. Leave this house before I forget my restraint." The room spun around her. She opened her mouth to beg, but Alexander turned his face away. Clarissa's eyes locked with hers, a quiet victory gleaming within them. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, as if invisible hands were crushing her heart. She had lost. Within the hour, Evelyn's belongings were thrown into a small suitcase. Guards escorted her to the gates of the mansion she had called home for years. She stood on the road, watching the gates close, her soul shattered, but Clarissa didn't stop there. 2 days later, Evelyn's name appeared in the city gossip columns. Rumors spread that she had stolen jewelry, that she had been caught sneaking into Alexander's private study, that she had been fired for disloyalty. None of it was true, but the whispers grew, and soon Evelyn couldn't step into a shop without feeling the stares. Clarissa had stripped her of her livelihood, her reputation, her safety. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Alexander worsened. Clarissa smiled sweetly for the doctors, hosting them with wine and charm, while her husband wasted away slowly, and Alexander, trapped in his weakness, clung to her, believing she was the only one holding him up. Evelyn sat in a tiny rented room across the city, her stomach empty, her spirit broken. She had risked everything to save him, and in return she was cast out like trash. But each night, as she stared at the cracked ceiling, one thought refused to die. If Clarissa thought she had silenced her forever, she was wrong, because Evelyn still had one weapon left: the truth, and this time, she would bring it to light in a way Clarissa could never twist. Evelyn spent days wandering the streets, clutching the last of her savings, replaying every moment in her head. Clarissa had destroyed her, turned Alexander against her, and nearly erased her existence. But Evelyn had grown up in hardship, raised by a mother who taught her one unshakable lesson: the truth always leaves a trail, and so she decided to follow it. If she couldn't save Alexander by warning him, she would expose Clarissa by uncovering what lay buried in her past. Her search began small. She visited the market vendors who supplied the mansion, listening carefully to their gossip. Clarissa was a frequent buyer of expensive herbs, but Evelyn noticed one detail that made her blood run cold. She often ordered shipments under a false name. Pushing further, Evelyn tracked down an elderly apothecary in another district. His memory was sharp, despite his age. Yes, he told her quietly, a tall, elegant woman with striking eyes. She comes often for rare powders. She says they're for perfumes, but I know the scent of nightshade when I crush it. That woman, she buys death disguised as beauty. The words struck Evelyn like a blade. Clarissa had been weaving poison into Alexander's meals for months, maybe longer, but how to prove it? One afternoon, Evelyn returned to the apothecary, desperate for answers. The old man looked uneasy. "Be careful, child. You're not the first to question her. Years ago another man came, asking the same things. Weeks later, his body was found floating by the docks. The coroner said heart failure, but I know better." Evelyn's heart pounded. Clarissa wasn't just clever, she was ruthless. Anyone who got too close to her secrets vanished. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Alexander was deteriorating rapidly. Clarissa had tightened her grip on him, now controlling not only his meals but his business decisions. Lawyers came and went with documents, papers he was too weak to read, signing them under her coaxing smile. Whispers spread that the empire would soon belong entirely to her. But fate gave Evelyn one more chance. Late one evening, while passing through the city square, she overheard a heated argument. A man's voice, low and angry. "You promised me payment, Clarissa. Do you think I risked everything for nothing?" Evelyn froze. Around the corner, half hidden by shadows, stood Clarissa, her perfect mask cracking, her voice sharp. "You'll get what you're owed when the job is finished. Until then, keep your mouth shut." And standing opposite her was none other than the stranger in the grey suit, the same man who had lured Evelyn into the garden trap. Her pulse raced. The man wasn't just a decoy, he was an accomplice. She followed them at a distance, heart hammering, until they separated into the night. Now Evelyn knew Clarissa wasn't acting alone. There was a web around Alexander bigger than anyone suspected, and if Evelyn could pull just one thread, maybe the whole web would unravel. For days Evelyn shadowed the man in the grey suit, always keeping far enough not to be noticed. His routines were careful, secretive. He met Clarissa often in back alleys, in expensive restaurants tucked away from public view, sometimes exchanging small envelopes, sometimes only words spoken too low for Evelyn to catch. But one evening, luck tilted in her favor. The man left a briefcase unattended in a hotel lobby while speaking to the receptionist. Evelyn's pulse thundered as she slipped behind a column, waiting for the perfect moment. When his back turned, she moved swiftly, opening the briefcase just a crack. What she saw inside made her gasp. Documents, legal ones, stamped with Alexander Cole's name, contracts transferring ownership of several major companies, properties and accounts. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tucked among them was a faded photograph. Clarissa stood in it, much younger. Her smile brighter but her eyes unmistakable. Beside her was a boy, no more than 10 years old, his arm wrapped around her waist. On the back of the photograph, scrawled in neat handwriting were the words, "For my son Adrian." Evelyn's breath caught. Adrian, the man in the grey suit, wasn't just some accomplice. He was Clarissa's son. Her mind spun as the truth hit her like lightning. Alexander had no idea his wife had a secret child, grown into a man working from the shadows, and suddenly, Clarissa's motives made horrifying sense. She wasn't just poisoning Alexander for money. She was dismantling his empire piece by piece to hand it over to her son. It wasn't greed, it was vengeance. Evelyn's stomach twisted, but vengeance for what? The answer came faster than she expected. Days later, as she listened in through a cracked door at a hidden meeting, she heard Adrian's voice, dripping with bitterness. "He left you with nothing," Adrian hissed. "He abandoned you when you needed him most. You think I've forgotten how we struggled, how you cried because he built a kingdom with another woman while we starved. This is justice, Mother. We're only taking back what he stole." Clarissa's reply was cold, calm, "And when he's gone, no one will question it. His fortune, his power, his legacy, all of it will belong to us." Evelyn staggered back, her heart in her throat. This wasn't just about control of the empire. Clarissa's entire marriage to Alexander had been built on a lie. She hadn't loved him. She had plotted against him from the beginning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, with Alexander weaker than ever, that moment was almost here. Evelyn knew she had one final chance. If she didn't act now, Alexander would not survive. But the risk was higher than ever, because exposing Clarissa and Adrian meant taking on a family bound by blood and revenge, and Evelyn was utterly alone. Evelyn could barely sleep that night. Every second that passed felt like another nail in Alexander's coffin. She had proof now, real proof: the photograph, the overheard confession, the contracts. But what good was proof if she couldn't get Alexander to see it before Clarissa finished him? At dawn she made her choice. She would break into the mansion. Her hands shook as she slipped through a side gate she remembered from her years of service, one the guards rarely checked. Her body pressed against the cool stone wall, heart hammering with each step as she moved through the grounds. Every shadow felt like it might leap out. Every creak of the house seemed louder than thunder. She found Alexander in his study, slumped in his chair, his face pale and damp with sweat. Papers littered the desk, contracts he had signed without reading, his empire crumbling under Clarissa's hand. His breathing was shallow, his once commanding presence now nothing more than a whisper of the man he used to be. "Mr. Cole," Evelyn whispered, stepping forward. His eyes fluttered open, confusion flashed across his face, followed by anger. I told you to leave." Evelyn dropped to her knees, clutching the photograph and papers in her hands. "Please, sir, just listen. For once listen. She is killing you. Clarissa is not who you think she is." And this, she held up the photograph, her voice shaking. "This is the truth." Alexander's tired eyes squinted at the photo. For a moment nothing, then a flicker of recognition. His lips trembled. "That boy, Adrian." "Yes," Evelyn said urgently. "Her son. She's been planning this for years. Every meal, every signature. She's not saving you, she's destroying you. Look at these contracts. You've already signed half your fortune away to her allies. Soon there will be nothing left." The silence was suffocating. Alexander's chest rose and fell, his breath shallow. And then a sound broke the air: slow, deliberate clapping. Evelyn whipped around. Clarissa stood at the doorway, her smile sharp as a blade, Adrian at her side. "Well done, Evelyn." Clarissa putted, "I underestimated you, but it won't matter. Do you think anyone will believe the word of a disgraced maid over a wife who has stood loyally by her husband's side?" Adrian stepped forward, his eyes burning with hatred. "Put the papers down, now." Evelyn's pulse raced. She knew she had seconds to act. With trembling hands she shoved the photograph and documents into Alexander's lap. "Sir, if you still trust her more than me, burn them. But if there's even a part of you that doubts her, hold on to them. It's your only chance." Clarissa's smile faltered. Adrian reached forward, but Alexander's weak hand slammed down on the papers, clutching them to his chest. His voice, though hoarse, carried a spark of steel. "Enough." Clarissa froze. For the first time in weeks, Alexander's eyes cleared. He looked at Evelyn, then at his wife, and a storm brewed in his gaze. "I may be weak, Clarissa, but I am not blind. Evelyn risked everything to bring me the truth, and you," his voice broke into a cough, "you've been feeding me death in my own home." Clarissa's mask cracked, anger flashing across her face. Adrian moved toward the desk, but Alexander pressed a button beneath it. Within seconds, the guards he thought were loyal to Clarissa stormed in only to take orders from him. "You forget, Clarissa," Alexander rasped. "This is still my empire." The room erupted into chaos. Guards restrained Adrian as he shouted, his mother screaming for them to stop. Clarissa thrashed, her perfect composure shattering, her voice breaking into venom. "You'll regret this, Alexander. Everything you have should have been mine. He left me with nothing, and I vowed you would pay." Alexander's face turned ashen, the betrayal cutting deeper than any poison. Evelyn stood silently at his side, her heart pounding as the truth spilled into the open like broken glass. At last the guards dragged Clarissa and Adrian away. The echoes of her fury rang through the mansion, but her power was gone. Alexander slumped back in his chair, weak but alive. He turned his head toward Evelyn, his voice faint but steady. "You saved me." Tears burned her eyes, but she managed a trembling smile. "No, sir, the truth saved you. I only carried it to the light." Outside, the day stretched warm and bright, a sharp contrast to the darkness that had nearly consumed them all. The empire was wounded but not broken, and for the first time in weeks, hope dared to breathe again inside the mansion. And Evelyn, she was no longer just a maid. She was the woman who stood against betrayal, who fought for a truth everyone else was too blind to see. What happened in Alexander's mansion wasn't just a tale of wealth and betrayal, it was a mirror of life itself. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones sharpening the knife behind our back. Sometimes, the ones we ignore, the ones we underestimate, carry the courage that saves us when the world falls apart. Evelyn was just a maid in their eyes, yet she held more loyalty, more truth, and more humanity than all the riches in that house. And that's the lesson. True power doesn't come from money or titles, it comes from character. Wealth can be stolen, poisoned, or signed away, but integrity, that is priceless. Clarissa lost everything because she chose greed over love. Alexander almost lost his life because he placed trust where it didn't belong. And Evelyn gained a legacy because she stood for what was right when it would have been easier to stay silent. So ask yourself, who would you be in this story? The betrayer, the blind victim, or the silent protector who dares to uncover the truth? This has been Story Globe, where every story carries a heartbeat, a lesson, and a warning. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and join us next time, because the next story may just open your eyes in ways you never imagined.